Hi, thank you for joining us today to talk about infant and toddler sleep, back to the basics. Really looking at our sleep recommendations for infants and toddlers, ways to support healthy sleep for infants and toddlers, and then some tips and tricks so you guys can get some rest as well. So a little about me. My name is Lauren George. I am the Family Support Specialist with Child Care Answers. So in my role, I do parent workshops, one-on-one support with families related to anything developmental with their child, really focusing on infants and toddlers and children with special needs. And I also help locate and connect families to high quality childcare. My email is on the screen. It's just laureng@childcareanswers.com. So feel free to reach out for resources or support. I will also be linking 3 handouts connected to today's session. One on transitioning to toddler beds, one on infant and toddler sleep patterns. So looking at sleep needs for infants and toddlers, and then additionally setting routines for infant and toddler sleep. So look for those as well. Child Care Answers is active on social media, so follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as well as like us on YouTube. You can view all of our recorded webinars anytime, as well as some additional videos. And then follow us on LinkedIn as an employer or a community member as well. Additionally, on our website, you'll find at childcareanswers.com/yourchild several parenting tips and parenting resources, from breastfeeding to biting to potty training and anywhere in between, as well as links to some of those YouTube webinars that I mentioned earlier. So today, as we really dive into infant and toddler sleep, we're going to identify some sleep facts, kind of get some baseline information on the science behind infant and toddler sleep. We are going to look at information on safe sleep for babies, as well as touch on transitions and regressions that may happen during those first couple of years of life. And then we'll also talk a little bit about sleep training myths, and then leave time for questions as well. So I think it's important, as we're getting started with this content, is to really think about, what are my sleep questions? What are those things that either I'm worried about, things that aren't working, things that I need support on, or kind of preparing for that next stage of development. I have maybe a 3-month-old, but I want to know what's coming, or I know my child's going to be transitioning to a toddler bed soon. What should I do about that transition? So first, think about, what are my sleep questions, and then ideally kind of picking and choosing that information throughout the PowerPoint today to kind of get those answers met for you. If your questions are not answered throughout the presentation today, feel free to reach out, and I can answer them and connect you to resources as well. So the first thing we're going to really look at is the science behind sleep and those things that every parent should know related to sleep for their infants and toddlers. The first one being routines matter. So routines are a really big part of sleep. They promote better sleep for all involved. So it promotes better sleep for parents and for their young children. It promotes the bond between a parent and child, because it creates something that's very consistent. Children thrive on consistency and predictability. So when they have that, there's less stress, they know what to expect, and it increases that parent-child bond. As well as it can aid in transitional periods. So when there is a strong routine established, when things like regressions or transitions happen, they actually are smoother than when there's not a strong routine established. So the first part of really establishing good sleep habits is having a consistent and predictable routine. A routine isn't necessarily a schedule, but a set of steps that happen in a predictable manner. meaning I might not have dinner at the same time every night, but I always have dinner after I get home from work and before we put the kids to bed. So there's always that predictability in the evening. I know what's going to come and I know what to expect. Sometimes I order dinner, sometimes I make it, but the routines around mealtime are always the same. So as we begin to establish a solid routine, it's important to understand what typical sleep patterns are for children, which is one of the handouts that will be linked, as well as it's a slide that will be coming up. It's really important to know how much sleep I should be expecting, when I should be offering naps, how long those naps should be in order to create some predictability. As we're also establishing this routine, it's important that we're setting the stage for sleep. So a routine really should be paired with the set of things that kind of set the stage. So a bedtime routine wouldn't involve a dance party. It would involve reading a quiet book, playing some soft music, dimming the lights, really setting the stage for sleep. Additionally, it's important in the first couple of years of life to really put routines first. That doesn't necessarily mean routines won't be thrown off and there are days that we'll skip nap and things like that, but it's really important that our routine is the priority. So it's ensuring as much consistency as possible. So if it may be mealtime or a party at grandparents' house, that they're flexible in the time frame to adjust for nap routines. So maybe having mealtime for a toddler at a grandparent's house at noon is not the best time frame in order to arrange that gathering, because that's about the time that a toddler is wanting to go down for a nap. Doing something before or after might be more conducive to putting that routine first. Additionally, if our child's going to bed at 7 at night, it's ensuring that we're home from whatever we're doing and following through with that routine and not staying out late. Again, routines are going to shift, they're going to change, and things are always going to get in the way of that. It's just trying as best as possible to keep that routine first and consistent. So here are the typical sleep patterns for infants and toddlers up to age 3. So I know that this is a lot of information and it can seem very overwhelming, but what I find helpful is to really just stick with your child's age group. Just look at, what does my child need now? And then maybe look to the future, one age group. So you don't need to worry about what 18-month-olds are going to be needing if your baby is only 3 months old. You're just not there yet. So maybe sticking with those 3-month patterns and then those 5 to 6 month patterns. I find as a parent and as a caregiver of infants and toddlers that they are ready for the next step, oftentimes before we are. We get kind of used to the routine, we're good, things are working well, we don't want to admit that our baby's getting bigger, and then all of a sudden they have this shift and their needs are a little bit different. And sometimes as a parent, that's hard to adjust. It's hard to adjust from bottle feeding, and now all of a sudden my infant is eating 3 meals and 2 snacks a day. How do I adjust? They're usually ready for that jump before we are. How do I adjust from my toddler going from 2 or 3 naps a day to 1 nap a day? And for me at my house right now, we are making that then adjustment to a toddler bed and taking Passy away, which should not happen at the same time. So there's a lot of adjustment that happens. My daughter is likely ready for those adjustments before I am, but it's important that we know kind of what's coming and what to expect in order to continue this consistency. So if we're looking at these typical sleep patterns, what we're really looking at is the age of your child, how many naps they're typically taking in a day, the total amount of daytime sleep and nighttime sleep, and then the length of each nap I should be expecting, as well as the awake time between naps. So a lot of this information is important, but I think the most helpful piece of information on this tool is that awake time between naps. So that is your guide to know when that next sleep should occur. Again, creating predictability in the routine, but some days your baby's going to wake up at 6 and other days they'll sleep till 8. So the times may shift daily, but the predictability of the routine should remain the same. So I know if my baby is 3 months old, that they're awake about 1 to 2 hours between naps. Meaning if my baby woke up at 7, then I'm looking for sleep cues anywhere between 8 and 9. They might sleep for 30 minutes. And then I'm looking for sleep cues again, an hour to 2 hours after that awake time. And then judging nighttime sleep based on their last wake time. So if they woke up from their last nap at 5, they're ready for bed anywhere between 6 and 7. For a 12-month-old who has a longer awake window from 3 to 4.5 hours, if they woke up from their nap at 2:30, which is consistent for a toddler in childcare, then that next sleep, so bedtime sleep, if they're doing one nap a day, is 3:30, 4:30, 5:30 to 7. So anywhere between that time frame, they're going to be tired and ready for bed. And I know it's crazy to think that 6 o'clock may be the preferred bedtime of a 1-year-old, especially for parents who are working and they may not even get home from work until 6. But it's really taking into consideration the needs of the child, as well as establishing a routine that works based around the needs of that child. So it may be that that baby takes a nap on the way home from school, even a 20-minute nap, which can extend them to maybe a 7 or 7:30 bedtime. Or it may be that you just know that as soon as you get home, you start dinner, you start bath, and your baby is in bed as soon as possible, which definitely takes away from the play that you get and that time you spend with your child, but it's temporary. Their awake windows are going to adjust 2 months from now and then another 4 months from now. So it's just a temporary solution. I remember that there being times that my kids would go to bed at 6:30. And I felt like I didn't get to spend any time with them during the day, but I knew it was best for their routine and their sleep schedule. So sticking with something super consistent helps avoid other sleep issues as they come up. So we will come back to the sleep patterns when we talk about naps in just a little bit, but this is also one of the handouts that you can print and hang up, put it on your fridge, have available, give it to the other caregivers, because this is something that I'm constantly going back to. As my brother's asking questions about his baby, I'm constantly going back to how old is he? What is his awake window? Okay, based on that, this is what I would expect his day to look like. So another part of this consistency around routines is creating bedtime routines or a bedtime ritual. So these are things that we do to transition a baby or a toddler, which usually these things are very consistent for the most part as your child gets older, from its play, its daytime, to now it's time to go to bed at night. Really helping them understand the difference between nap time and bedtime, and setting that stage for a restful sleep all night. So here is a sample of a routine. This is very similar to the routine that I did with my kids when they were both infants, and picking and choosing things out of here. I'm very consistent to what we still do, developmentally appropriate based on their ages now. So first, starting with a bath, a diaper change, and like a lotion rub or anything that you might do related to diapering after bath. I found it very helpful as a parent to do bath every night with my kiddos, starting at just a couple weeks old. There were definitely days that they probably didn't need a bath, but both my husband and I were very consistent in bath as part of our bedtime routine. So whether you need it or not, you take one every single day, because it's establishing that consistency. My babies very quickly learned that when we took a bath, then it was going to be time for bed. And that is something that I do very, very consistently until about 2.5. After 2.5, I am okay breaking that bath time routine a little bit. There are nights that my daughter doesn't take a bath or a shower, but they're very hit or miss. For the majority of the time she's taking one, And then my 7-year-old probably does it every other day. But he kind of understands the bedtime routine more than an infant or a toddler does. So he understands that it's still bedtime, even though I didn't take a shower, where it's very important that a 6-month-old is still getting that consistency because they don't understand that difference. Once we do our bath and our diaper, our massage with lotion, whatever it might be, then we transition into putting jammies on and reading a quiet book or singing a calming song together. So depending on how you want to set up your routine, that's completely up to you as the parent on what that looks like. But reading books together and sharing songs together is a great bonding moment for parents and babies. After reading a story or doing something quiet together, it's then making that transition even more simple and calming for baby. So it's putting them in a sleep sack or a swaddle, depending on age. Swaddle for non-mobile infants. It does help with that startle response, and it can help them stay asleep longer. And then a sleep sack for your mobile infants or babies who don't like to be swaddled. They do make sleep sacks up to a 5T, so it is something that you can continue into the toddler years. A sleep sack is a great option instead of a blanket. Blankets are not necessarily the safest thing to have in a sleep environment with infants or toddlers. It doesn't follow safe sleep practices. And just because a baby is over 1 doesn't mean that they all of a sudden know how to use a blanket. That's usually a skill that develops after age 2. So I always found that sleep sacks were a great warmth alternative without having something loose in the bed. And then either dim lights or turn lights off completely. We use a white noise machine in both of our kids' rooms. It's very similar to a sound. It drowns out background noise, and it also helps transition to sleep and keep babies asleep longer. So turning on that sound machine is also that signal to know, like, hey, it's dark, I've had my bath, I'm in my sleep sack, and the white noise is on. I know it's time for bed. And then lastly, it's nursing or bottle feeding, snuggling and rocking your baby, and then laying them down. Whether that is asleep or awake, that's completely up to you. There's really no research that shows that rocking your baby to sleep or nursing your baby to sleep and then laying them down is going to create unhealthy sleep habits. I nursed my babies to sleep. I nursed my son to sleep for a year. I would have to like army crawl myself out of the room, and he's a 7-year-old that sleeps just fine now. My daughter was the baby that either would nurse or bottle feed, hand it to me and say night-night time. I'd stick her in her bed and I would leave, and that would be that. So every baby is different. Every toddler is different. Every child is different. And sleep is going to go like this. So you might rock them to sleep now, and then at 9 months, they might decide that I'm not cool with this. I don't like this. My daughter is not super touchy-feely, so she doesn't like to cuddle or to rock. My 7-year-old wants me to cuddle and rub his back until he falls asleep. So again, every baby is very different, but you're not creating unhealthy sleep habits by nursing or rocking your baby to sleep. That is your own personal choice. Don't feel guilty for what others may say against that belief. And then I like how this says, try leaving the room, because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. As a parent, you're going to very quickly learn how to sneak out of the room if you need to do that. So how to kind of cover their face and sneak out, how to get down on the ground and army crawl out, how to close the door without it waking them, whatever that may be. So there may be times that you put your baby to sleep, you leave, they fuss, you go back in, you rub their belly, you leave, and you have to do that a couple of times to reassure them that like, you're safe, it's time for bed. But as we talk about waking later, it's important to know your baby's cries and to know your baby's screams. And if your baby is screaming like, I cannot believe you just left me in this room by myself, you're the worst mother ever, then go back and reassure your baby. If your baby is saying, I cannot believe you did this, you are so mean, I do not like this, and they are just crying to express their displeasure, then you know that you can let them kind of yell at you for a minute and see if they fall asleep on their own. I find that video monitors are a great tool because you can then see what's happening in there. Is your baby or toddler standing or sitting up in their bed? I probably need to go back. Are they just kind of rolling around looking for their passy, trying to get comfortable, complaining? I probably don't need to re-engage yet. So giving yourself time and awareness of when you need to kind of step back into the room. Additionally, as we look at routines and we look at nighttime sleep, naps are just as important as nighttime sleep. So naps really set the foundation for nighttime sleep. If a baby or a toddler is well rested, they've had good naps, they've had consistent naps, they're going to transition to sleep at night much smoother and easier than an overtired child who has inconsistent nap schedules or isn't getting enough daytime sleep. So it's actually a myth that if we keep our kids up later or we limit their sleep, that they'll sleep better at night. It's actually the opposite for young children. The more sleep based on their sleep windows that they're getting during the day translates to better, more consistent sleep at night. So going again back to those awake windows. So I pulled out basically just the age, the naps, and the awake windows. But this really kind of gives you a clue into what to expect for daytime sleep. The biggest thing that I hear is how often should my baby be napping? When should we cut down to 1 nap a day for a toddler? What does that all look like? How do I create consistency with naps? And this is really your tool to do it. It's setting that nap time based on the awake time in the morning. So your baby woke up for the day. And by baby, I call my 2-year-old a baby. So your child wakes up for the day at 7. Depending on their age and their awake window, you now have a ticket or a clue into when that next nap should be. So if your baby woke up at 7 and they're 3 months old, then between 8 and 9, I'm really looking for sleep cues. If your baby is 9 months old, then I'm looking for them between 10 and 11. If your baby is 2, I'm looking for them, a little bit later, between 12 and 1:30. So really basing that nap time on their awake time, and then really trying to plan ahead for nighttime sleep. So if their next nap is due at 6:30 p.m. Because of how they woke up and all of that, then maybe pushing that back 30 minutes to just transition them to nighttime sleep and kind of skipping that nap that day. If they woke up earlier that day, say that they're a 4:30 a.m. riser, because that sometimes happens with young babies, especially as they're learning new skills, then I know I might need to add an additional nap into the day or create this routine that may lead to an early bedtime that night. So really using this as your tool to decide how many naps and the time between naps every single day. An additional fact on sleep is really looking at how sleep matures with time. And so don't overthink it. Babies are learning. They're learning a lot of skills, sleep being one of them. When a baby is born, their brain is at 25% of their adult capacity. And by age 1, it's at 75% of their adult capacity. So there is so much growth and learning that happens in that first year of life. And because of that, sleep gets disturbed a lot. Additionally, babies aren't supposed to sleep 10 straight hours at night. That is not necessarily what their body was designed to do. Sleep is essential for brain growth, which is why naps are so essential for sleep. They're going to wake frequently as they're learning new skills. They sleep lighter and they wake up more frequently. And a lot of those are protective factors. But just like their physical development matures with time, their fine motor development matures with time, their emotional development matures with time. The way that a 1-year-old is tantruming is likely not going to happen when they're 6, because they've developed the other skills needed to express themselves in a way that doesn't need to be expressed through a tantrum. Sleep is the same way. As their body grows and develops, They learn how to sleep longer. They learn how to put themselves to sleep. They learn that it's okay that you're not in the room while I'm sleeping. And sleep is just kind of maturing along that path. So when we look specifically at newborns, because you will notice on the sleep patterns, newborns aren't on there. Newborns from birth to about 3 months old are very unpredictable in their sleep. It may feel at times that they're always sleeping. They're getting about 16 to 17 hours of sleep every single day, split pretty equally between night and day. So they're getting about 8 hours during the day, 8 hours at night. Usually awake only 30 minutes to an hour at a time before they're falling asleep again. So parents sometimes get this disruption, right? So I'm used to my newborn sleeping pretty frequently. They're always asleep. They wake to eat, they go back to sleep. They wake to eat, they go back to sleep. And then as they get a little bit older and more aware of what's happening, all of a sudden we're getting these large disruptions in sleep where they're not wanting to go back to sleep. They're awake longer. And that is because they're transitioning from toddler sleep or from newborn sleep into regular infant sleep. And those changes are there to stay. They will never go back to the way that an infant sleeps. There's also a lot of day-night confusion. So they don't know the difference between night and day. They don't know that at night I'm supposed to sleep and at day I'm supposed to be awake. So part of being a parent is teaching them those circadian rhythms or differentiating between daytime and nighttime sleep. So some things that you can do to help a newborn develop their internal clock is to change their clothes in the morning and at night. So changing them into clothes in the morning when they wake up and then again back into their pajamas at night. Involving a baby in the hustle and bustle of the day. So going about the day, keeping the lights on, maybe being loud so that they know like day is a time for play, it's a time for interacting, it's a time for socializing, it's a time for running to the store or doing whatever it is, while exposing them to a lot of natural light. And then in the evenings, it's kind of removing that hustle and bustle. We're dimming the lights at night, we're limiting stimulation, especially at night feedings. They're going to be waking still pretty frequently to eat. So it's not changing their diaper. You don't need to burp them. You don't need to turn the lights on any more than to see what's happening, and really not trying to stimulate your baby. I found it helpful in the middle of the night feedings to even leave my baby swaddled if they were starting to nurse well, and I didn't have to kind of like completely strip them down to naked to nurse, or if they're bottle fed, of leaving them swaddled. Don't change the diaper, don't burp them, feed them, and just put them right down back to bed. Oftentimes newborns will fall asleep while they're eating, so that helps kind of transition them right back into sleep. They're going to make some noises and fuss and move while they're sleeping, and so it's delaying the time that we respond to them, not promoting things like cry it out, but really just giving them that time to wake and then fall back asleep. If they're crying or making movements that signal, hey, I need to eat, obviously it's picking them up, responding to them, and feeding them. But if they're just making those newborn sounds, those grunts and those moans, it's kind of letting them go and not responding too quickly, which I think is hard for a new mom, especially. I know it was hard for me. But at those night feedings especially, don't feel this pressure to burp them. First of all, over burping actually leads to more spit up than burping in the first place. Babies don't need to be burped like we once thought they did, but also the safest position for a baby to spit up while sleeping is flat on their back. So don't be worried that your baby is going to spit up and choke if they are laying on their back. That is actually the safest position, and they will not choke in that position. Additionally, as we're looking at how sleep develops over time, it's important to understand on all angles that every baby is different. They develop at their own pace and within their own experiences. So my two kids are very different. They were very different babies. They're very different as a 3 and 7 year old. Their needs are just different. The way I respond to them is different. And they both have developed differently. My son wasn't walking till 15, 16 months. My daughter was walking at 10 months. My daughter at 9 months old would hand me her bottle and basically point and tell me, just put me in my bed, it's time to go to sleep. My son, like I mentioned, I had to nurse him to sleep and then army crawl my way out of there. They're all just so different. So just because someone's baby is doing one thing doesn't mean that your baby should be doing those same things. Additionally, babies develop within their own experiences. So let's think about this in terms of physical development. So a baby is never going to learn to crawl if they were never given the opportunity to practice tummy time and floor time. They're never going to walk if they never got the opportunity to crawl and to be on the floor and to be able to pull up and to be able to move their bodies. That's the same with language development and all of these other things. So it's all about what my experiences are and what I've been exposed to. So if we've nursed our baby to sleep for a year and a half, and now all of a sudden we expect to lay our toddler down and they go right to sleep, that may not be an appropriate expectation. They may need to learn that skill, which doesn't take too long to develop, because weaning is difficult. They're learning that I don't get mommy's milk, but I also don't get that comfort of nursing and rocking to sleep with mom. So it may be phasing things out. You may not be nursing, but now you rock, and I rock you to sleep, and then I transition to rocking you until drowsy, and then I transition to just laying you down at 2 years. Whatever it is for your family, it's just, our babies are all different and they develop within their own experiences. Additionally, there's no good or bad when it comes to babies and sleep. I hate when people talk about, is your baby a good sleeper or a bad sleeper? There is no such thing. Again, every baby is different. And when we use that language, then we're putting in the minds of parents that there's something wrong with them or something wrong with their baby. It is not typical for a 2-week-old to be sleeping through the night. So if your newborn is not sleeping through the night, that is normal, not atypical. There are several 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds that are still waking at least once at night. So throw out that whole concept of a good or a bad sleeper. Additionally, self-soothing, which is the skill when babies learn to calm themselves, only starts to form at 6 months old. That is when it begins to form, the ability to soothe myself. Before 6 months, I need an adult to soothe me. After 6 months, I still need support of an adult because I can't just snap my fingers and be able to do it by myself. So it's understanding in things like Cry It Out or the Ferber method that babies do not have the capacity to self-soothe. They need the support of an adult or a comfort tool like a pacifier to help me soothe myself. And then infants and toddlers' needs vary with each developmental change. So what a 3-month-old needs is different than a 9-month-old, which is different than an 18-month-old, which is different than a 3-year-old. And so it's ensuring that what we're giving our children matches that developmental change that's happening within them. And so as we're looking at sleep patterns, we're looking at creating this predictability. We're understanding that sleep needs are different and every baby is different. There are some very common cues that our children give us that let us know that they're tired. So what I do is really look at, okay, our awake window is 2 to 3 hours. So during that time frame, I'm looking specifically for these sleep cues. They start as something that you really have to be mindful of and look for, and eventually progress into things that you can just kind of pick up and notice, and that you start noticing in other people's babies as well. So some early cues are that they're starting to stare off into space, they're turning their head away, they're disengaging. It's kind of just that blank stare. And my 3-year-old still gives the blank stare when she's tired. They might be playing and giggling or making eye contact, and then all of a sudden it's just the blank stare off into space. That is your number one cue. You are getting tired. Another cue is that their eyes start fluttering, or their eyebrows actually get red. So those are some cues that let us know it's time to put your baby to sleep. The earlier in the cues we start sleep, the easier it is for our kids to fall asleep. When we're overtired, it's actually harder to fall asleep than when we start with those early or later cues. Some later cues, which are the most noticeable cues, are that they're starting to tug on their ears, they're yawning, they're rubbing their eyes, they start getting pretty fussy and just kind of meh. Sometimes they get hanger added into there. For toddlers, we see a lot of clumsiness or clinginess and whining. They might start falling over or tripping or starting to get like this burst of energy, and then they're like slap happy. And then we also see fussiness with food and boredom with toys. So we're trying to feed them and they're kind of just playing with the bottle, they're throwing food, they're not playing with toys that they once were playing with. That lets us know that they're starting to get tired. And then signs of overtired, which is arching their back, becoming stiff and rigid, they're crying uncontrollably, their fists are clenched, they are mad. They are saying, I have been trying to tell you for the last hour that I'm tired and you haven't been listening to me, and now I'm just ticked off. So you cannot put to bed an overtired baby or an overtired child. You have to first calm and soothe and then put them to sleep. So it actually takes a longer and it is more difficult to put a baby or a child to bed when they are overtired versus really looking at those early or later cues. Kind of similar to the fact that every baby is different is that infant and toddler sleep cycles are just different in general. They are different than adult sleep cycles, and they are different than the sleep cycles of older children. So their sleep cycles are shorter. It takes them longer to enter deep sleep, and they wake frequently because of that. It is just the way that their sleep cycles are kind of set up from birth. It is just nature's way of kind of wiring the baby brain. So because of this, we find a lot of night waking. And night waking is actually instinctual. It is this instinctual survival technique that is really designed for babies never to get into too deep of sleep. Too deep of a sleep is actually a risk factor for SIDS, as well as when babies are lighter sleepers, they are more aware of when they're hungry and can wake themselves up to eat. And they are also more aware of if they are hot, cold, or uncomfortable, so that they can wake you up and cry to basically say, like, something is bothering me, I'm not feeling well, I'm too hot, I'm too cold. And they're able to communicate those messages. So it's actually a good thing that our babies are waking and signaling to us at night that they need something. It clues us into something is wrong or our baby needs something, whether it's a night feeding, a change of position, they need their passy back, or they just need comfort. So there have been several studies on night waking, and one study in particular shows that at 12 months old, about 28% of infants weren't yet sleeping 6 hours straight at night, and then 43% weren't sleeping 8 hours at night. So when we talk about these messages of good and bad babies, and is your baby sleeping through the night, and how's your baby sleeping, which are all questions that parents of infants are getting consistently, it's important to put into perspective that sleeping through the night at 12 months is actually a gold standard that has been established in Western cultures, and that it is not necessarily the expectation. Waking at 12 months is very different than waking at 3 months. Waking at 3 months is often pretty more frequent. They're waking, number one, is a preventative from SIDS, but also because they need to eat. They're still eating every couple of hours at night. Ideally, by 3 months, they're going a 5-hour stretch, which is life-changing for parents, but they still need to eat pretty frequently. At 12 months, they no longer really need to eat. For a nursing toddler, they still may be waking at 12 months just for comfort nursing in the middle of the night, one time typically, But they're usually waking up because they realize, like, I'm alone in this room, you're not here, where are you? And they're starting to have some separation anxiety and some age appropriate fears. So oftentimes when a toddler wakes up, it's a lot easier to transition them back to sleep than it is a 4-month-old, because they're just a little bit more aware of what's going on around them. You comfort them, you lay them back to sleep, you leave, you go about your day. Now, when my daughter wakes up at 3, it's very easy for me to just go in, tell her she's safe, give her a kiss, and then I leave again. So she still wakes at night sometimes. My 7-year-old still wakes at night sometimes. It's just something we all do. We all wake at night, but we have the ability to put ourselves back to sleep and to know that we're safe, and they just sometimes need a little bit of reassurance. So some reasons that your infant or toddler is waking at night. Number 1 is temporary sleep disruption. So this may be an illness, it may be teething, it may be a sleep regression, and it also may be separation anxiety, or kind of these developmental shifts that are happening. Additionally, inconsistent schedules or routine changes can lead to night waking. So if the routine was off that day, it actually can lead to night waking that night. One of the biggest indicators of night waking or changes, especially for babies who were sleeping through the night, who all of a sudden are not any longer, is this practicing a new skill or approaching a big milestone, which is oftentimes linked to sleep regressions. So if you think about this brain development that's happening in our baby, is all of the stuff going on up there, it can lead to a lot of disruptions as they're making these neural connections while they sleep. And they're beginning to practice these skills while they sleep. They're practicing rolling over and crawling and standing. And you may find your baby standing in the middle of the night who is sound asleep, but they're standing because their body just started practicing the skill at night. Or they're sitting up in bed kind of dozing off because they just learned that they can sit up, or they can get from laying down to sitting up. Rolling over is often something that really will disrupt sleep because they're practicing and rolling at night. And they may be able to practice in one direction, but they can't in the opposite direction. So for some of this, there's nothing we could really do. It's just a part of how their brain is developing in the first year. For others, especially those physical milestones, it's providing a lot of tummy time and floor time and physical activity during the day so that they can begin to master these big milestones and big skills, so that their body doesn't feel the need to practice them all the time. They know, like, I've got this. I know how to crawl. We're good here. Sleep regressions also coincide with a lot of these big milestones. And in a minute, I'll bring up some of those common timeframes for sleep regressions. They also may be craving a nighttime feeding. Either they need to eat, they're going through a developmental spurt, so they're reverting back to needing to eat because they're growing very quickly, or it becomes something that has been associated with comfort, and so they're craving that nighttime feed or nighttime comfort. And then additionally, separation anxiety, which usually develops at about 8 months or a little bit later. And it's when they wake up at night and they realize, you were here when I went to sleep and you are not anymore, and I don't like that. And so they may cry out needing just some comfort and reassurance. So here are some tips and tricks on what to do and what not to do when your child wakes up at night that can help them fall back asleep easier. So some of the do's are to utilize white noise machines and blackout shades. So infants and toddlers don't really have a need for a nightlight. They don't have those fears of a monster hiding in their closet that establish with our 2-year-olds and above. So keeping the room as dark as possible can really promote sleep, as well as the use of a sound machine or noise machine. It's going to drown out outside background noise, and it also creates a consistent sound that actually promotes them dozing off. Also, if you're hearing the scream Respond promptly. So if you hear your baby screaming and not crying, you want to make sure that you're responding promptly and going right in. It's usually a sign that there's something wrong. Also, you want to make sure that you want to give time to baby to settle back on their own before you respond if they are simply crying or making sounds. And that is where the use of a video monitor can really help, that you can see what's going on without having to arouse them, so that you can see, do I even need to intervene or not? I found this really helpful. As a parent with my son, we did not have a video monitor. So when he would cry out, I would always go in. With my daughter, we had one. And so when she would cry out, I could look. Is she sitting up and looking for me? Is she clearly mad, or is she just kind of crying in her sleep and rolling around and trying to get comfortable? And it really helped me respond appropriately. And I also think that it helped her learn how to fall asleep on her own faster, because I wasn't going in as often to arouse her. Again, that doesn't mean that I'm promoting cry it out. It just means that I'm reading her cues, and aware that she wasn't really needing me. She just was making sounds in her sleep. Also, for breastfed babies, you can consider a dream feed. So this means that your baby may be used to waking up at midnight for a feeding, but you go to bed at 10. It's waking them on your schedule and giving them a dream feed or nursing them at that time to help extend their long bout of sleep, so that they are sleeping their long stretch the same time that you are sleeping your long stretch. And that also might be something that helps get them through the night. So if your baby is waking at 5 a.m. because they're starving, also incorporating a dream feed for a baby who's sleeping through the night can help them stretch that morning sleep until 7 or 8, so that you're not waking consistently at 4 or 5 a.m. and then they're wanting to be up for the day. Additionally, swaddling for non-mobile infants does help with those involuntary movements, and can help prevent waking for those little ones. So the don'ts are, don't go rushing in to scoop baby up, automatically thinking something's wrong. You want to kind of make sure that you're not responding too quickly or too strong to your baby's request. Again, don't feel pressured to burp or diaper your baby in the middle of the night. Don't turn on lights or engage with them during night feeding. So don't sing songs, don't play with them, don't talk to them, and don't skip naps. Because again, naps are essential for healthy nighttime sleep. So when baby wakes up, follow the 3 B's: be quiet, be gentle, and be boring. So those are the 3 things that you want to do to help promote positive nighttime wakings, and so that we're not arousing them too much, is do the 3 B's: be quiet, be gentle, and be boring. So like I mentioned earlier, there are some common time frames in which babies have a regression in sleep. And they're oftentimes due to this burst of development. Some babies don't go through these, but the majority of babies do have these common sleep disruptions. So around 4 months old, there's usually a disruption in sleep due to development and increased awareness, and the fact that they're transitioning into a baby from a newborn, so it's taking longer for them to enter deep sleep. So they may arouse quicker when we lay them down to sleep and not kind of get into that deep sleep too fast. So we may need to go back a couple of times when we lay a 4-month-old down because they're sleeping super, super light. Around 8 and 9 months, they're seeing a regression due to motor development. So this is the time frame that you really find your baby is rolling and they're mad that they rolled, or they're practicing sitting in their sleep. There's a lot going on in their brain, as well as they're developing this huge boom of language. Maybe not verbally, they are definitely babbling and saying more things, but they're understanding language. So when they sleep, those connections are just firing, which can wake them up. At 12 months, there's another regression, usually around the time that crawling and walking are getting started. So crawling is becoming something that they master, and then they're starting this process of walking. They're also seeing and developing object permanence, which means I know you're still here even though you're not here. So we hide the ball under the blanket and they know the ball's under the blanket. Before this, they were looking like, where did the ball go? It disappeared. Now they're like, I don't fall for your tricks. I know it's under there. You hid it. Same with snacks. You hid that snack. Give it to me. I know where it is. It's behind your back or your phone. As well as there's usually a disruption in nap time sleep. So this may be a child in childcare transitioning to a toddler room and dropping that one nap so that they're only taking one nap a day, which they may not be ready for. This may mean that they are still on 2 long naps and they need one of those naps shortened. There's usually changes within sleep that are happening due to nap time changes. At 15 months, it's usually a nap issue. They're either too tired or they're getting too much sleep. So we either need to bump nighttime sleep down. So they dropped one nap and they're waking up at 2:30 and now they need to go to bed at 6:30, or they're still getting 2 naps and we're not adjusting nighttime sleep based on that. And usually around 15 months is when they drop that second nap and they no longer need it. And we really just need to adjust nighttime sleep. If they are getting that second nap and they wake up at 5, they're not ready for bed at 7. They're not going to be ready for bed until probably 9, which then can throw a lot of other things off, including nighttime sleep. So that is usually your cue at 15 months. If there is a sleep regression, it's because of that. At 18 months, we're having this huge explosion of language. They're becoming independent. They're learning to assert their independence, as well as they are developing this strong sense of separation anxiety. This is when you're going to have a lot of protest before they go to sleep. And that is because they're learning that I am my own person. I get to make my own choices. I don't want you to leave me. I'm having a hard time with this. And having a really, really solid routine can help prevent this sleep regression from ever happening in the first place. Additionally, we have that sleep regression that happens usually around age 2, which is very similar to our 18-month sleep regression. So with a very, very solid sleep routine, we sometimes don't see that sleep regression at 18 months present itself then. It presents itself at 2 instead. So this is because of that explosion of language, an increase in dependence, and they're starting to test the limits. Their awake window has increased, plus they have this increased imagination, which can lead to fears. There's a monster in my bed. My daughter used to wake up screaming, saying there were ants in her bed, and she would make us look in her bed for the ants. Plus they want to push. How far can I push? Can I have one more book, one more kiss, one more drink, one more this, one more that? So it's making sure at this sleep regression that we're keeping a consistent bedtime routine, but also keeping our limits very consistent. You can have one more kiss and then mommy is leaving. Mommy doesn't come back for, okay, one more, okay, one more, okay, one more, because then they continue to push and push and push and push. It's staying very consistent with the limits that we set. Toddlers sometimes are their own beasts. So as we're helping children move past a sleep regression, don't be afraid to offer an extra feeding, especially if you know that your child's going through this developmental burst. We want to make sure that we're offering comfort as needed, but again, not going in too frequently to wake them or arouse them. We want to maintain a strict bedtime routine and possibly bump a bedtime down earlier, depending on where they're at in that sleep regression and their awake window. And then we want to make sure that we're providing a lot of time to practice those motor skills during the day, as well as for your toddlers, offering extra emotional support and love during the day and active play during the day so that they're getting built up with all of that during the day and they're not seeking it at night. Which then takes us to the big transition. So from crib to toddler bed. So at some point during this time frame of being a toddler, we're gonna make this jump. Whether you decide to do it early at 18 months or late after age 3, completely up to you and what's best for your family. I personally like to delay this as long as possible. But for varying reasons, like them climbing out of their bed or your own parenting styles, you may decide to do this at different intervals. The time frame in which you do this is completely up to you and completely parent specific and child specific. But there are some tips and tricks that can help ease this transition so that it is less stressful on you and your child. Included in one of the handouts is a tip sheet on transitioning to a toddler bed, but I will share some of those tricks in this session as well. So some common challenges that arise with our transitioning toddlers is this resistance to bedtime, this sudden night wakings, difficulty returning to sleep, nighttime fears, separation anxiety, and FOMO, fear of missing out, which all leads to stalling techniques and stubbornness at bedtime. And so when we move them to a toddler bed and they're free, it can compound these issues because now instead of crying in my bed for you or playing with my passy or my stuffed animals, I can leave my bed and come find you. So as we're making this transition, we need to really respect that this is where our toddlers are coming from. So be patient but firm. It is not okay for you to leave your room. You can have one more kiss and then we're done, but be patient with them. We want to encourage their independence, and this can be providing them opportunities to choose their bedding, providing opportunities for them to choose the book before bed, to choose the placement of their bed, whatever that may be, as well as allowing them to have some minor control over that routine. Do you want to brush your teeth before your bath or after your bath? Do you want to read a book or sing a song? Do you want your pillow in this direction or that direction? Giving them control will then help avoid a power struggle, especially at bedtime. Which then brings us to sleep aids. So some sleep aids or comfort tools that do help promote sleep that can help you sleep as well are swaddling, again, for your non-mobile infants, which I've mentioned before. The use of a pacifier. So sucking is this natural thing that babies and young toddlers need. A pacifier has been linked to a reduction in SIDS, and it can promote self-soothing. So even if a 3-month-old stops using a passy, does not mean that if you don't continue to offer it, they won't pick it back up at 6, 7, 8 months when that need comes back again. I find that passy use is really, really beneficial for your toddlers to help them learn how to self-soothe and calm themselves, not only at night, but when they're having temper tantrums. And the stress of removing passy with a toddler 2 or a 3-year-old completely is null and void to the benefits that occur from pacifier use, in my opinion. But again, passy use is completely a parent choice, but it does help as a sleep aid and a comfort tool. You want to make sure for infants that nothing is attached to the passy in bed, so it's not attached to a string, a cord, or a wubba-nub, which is like a stuffed animal. And you can have 1,000 passies in their bed so that they can always find one in the middle of the night if they need that. Baby wearing also can promote comfort and sleep. It really allows babies to relax and feel comfort while still giving you 2 arms to do other things. So whether it's for a nap or just to comfort them before you transition them to sleep, it is a great comfort tool, as well as nursing and rocking. And then the use of white noise. All of those things I've kind of already mentioned. But again, reiterating, don't feel guilty for rocking and nursing your baby to sleep. You're not going to create these unhealthy sleep habits where you have a kindergartner who still expects to be rocked to sleep. That just isn't the case. Are you going to have to help them transition? Yes, but just the same as you'd have to help a baby who was swaddled transition out of the swaddle, or a child with a passy transition to no passy. And if we have a consistent routine and we have that parent-child bond, those routines are usually pretty easy as we're transitioning. And so just a little quote. So food spoils, babies don't. So never feel guilty about holding or wearing them. So hold him, wear him, breathe her in, keep her close. There is no such thing as too much love. It is impossible to spoil a baby and to spoil a human with love. You can spoil a toddler with cookies and toys all day long, but you can never spoil by holding or comforting your child. So again, don't feel guilty and don't let external stimuli tell you that that is not okay, because it is totally okay for you to hold and wear and comfort your baby as much as you choose to do that. And my last tip is really around practicing safe sleep. So all of this works when we're following the recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics and the CDC around safe sleep practices. As babies are developing and growing, their bodies are at risk because they're super dependent on the adult for comfort and safety. So until a child is old enough to comfort and control their own environment, it is essential that we're placing babies to sleep in a safe space. So what that means is that we're laying babies down on their backs to sleep, allowing them to roll over and adapt to their own sleep position. We're utilizing things like sleep sacks in place of a blanket, using a pacifier to reduce the risk of SIDS. We're having a separate sleep space. So if we're room sharing, which the American Academy of Pediatrics does recommend, that is a separate sleep space. So that baby is in a crib or pack and play or bassinet next to the adult bed, but not in the adult bed. And breastfeeding is a protective factor against SIDS as well. We really want to avoid loose bedding, blankets, or pillows, and be careful with that introduction. So just because your baby turns 1 doesn't mean we have to start throwing these things into the crib. They really don't need them. So that introduction should really be careful and smooth and very slow over the next year to 2 years. Whether it's introducing a pillow first or a lovey first, you really want to make that introduction pretty slow. And blankets typically are the last things that we introduce, because a baby or a toddler doesn't really use a blanket the way that blankets are meant to be used pretty consistently until about 2.5. You want to avoid placing your baby on their stomach to sleep. If they roll and put themselves on their stomach, that is okay. You want to make sure that Passy isn't attached to anything. We're not using any devices for sleep, like a swing, a bouncy seat, a car seat. And then there is no reason for crib bumpers. So for a non-mobile or non-standing infants, crib bumpers basically just create something that a baby could suffocate on. Once our baby is standing and they enter that toddler year, they then use it as a step to be able to climb out of their crib, which then lead to falls. So there's never an age that a bumper pad is safe for young children. Additionally, I just want to touch briefly on sleep training truths and busting the myth, because it is essential that we train our babies and our toddlers how to sleep. And that is everything that we've already talked about: establishing those solid routines, creating predictability, following awake windows and sleep routines, using comfort tools, all of that. Excuse me. Sleep training is not about sticking your baby in a room and letting them scream until they fall asleep. So There are tons and tons and tons of sleep methods. So based on the information that we talked about today and that was shared, you can then look with a different set of eyes or from a different perspective at those sleep training programs and decide what parts of them you want to adapt, whether it's laying your baby asleep or laying them down to sleep when they're kind of drowsy and letting them fall off to sleep if that's what you choose to do, nursing them to sleep and doing more of an attachment parenting style, or letting them fuss. That's completely up to you. But sleep training is not about crying and screaming and being upset until a baby gives up. So I think it's important to understand that when we're teaching our children how to sleep, we're teaching them that sleep is something positive and not something scary or a punishment. And then lastly, just kind of a review of what we talked about. So we want to encourage age-appropriate naps. Naps are essential for nighttime sleep. We want to establish an early bedtime. Sometimes it's earlier than we'd like, but based on those awake windows and sleep patterns. Additionally, maintaining a bedtime routine and creating predictability, especially predictable patterns that help our baby return back to sleep when they do wake at night. So here again is my contact information. It's just laureng@childcareanswers.com, as well as if you want to request one-on-one support and you don't want to just email me, which is totally fine, you can visit our family information form listed, which is just bit.ly/CCA families, or texting CARE to 833-222-1221. That will be how you can get a hold of Child Care Answers in order to find and locate childcare, or request one-on-one support, or join our mailing list for our newsletter. In addition to that, Child Care Answers is part of a statewide system of child care resource and referral networks. So here is a statewide map. We cover Hamilton, Hendricks, and Marion counties. But there is an agency that covers the entire state. So if for some reason you're not located in one of our 3 counties, we will do this warm handoff and connection to the other family engagement specialists throughout the state.